I was standing in the Hermitage Restoration workshop at 3 in the morning, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the magnifying glass. Beneath a layer of 18th century overpainting that had hidden the original for nearly 300 years, something appeared that shouldn't have existed. The 16th century portrait of a Venetian doge I had been restoring for the past 4 months turned out to be nothing like what it seemed. Under infrared imaging, the solitary figure in ceremonial robes dissolved, revealing a group portrait of 13 men in identical black garments. Each wore a silver crest on his chest, and every single one of them wore matching rings, with a symbol I initially mistook for Masonic. But this was older, more austere, and completely unique. A stylized octagon surrounding an all-seeing eye, rendered with such skill that every facet seemed alive. I took a photo on my phone and sent it to a colleague at the Louvre. Within 20 minutes, my number was blocked. An hour later, men in plain clothes were pounding on the workshop door, demanding all my materials. By morning, the museum director, a man I'd worked with for 15 years, called me in. He coldly informed me, avoiding eye contact, that work on the painting had been terminated by order of the Board of Trustees. He suggested I take a vacation, a long vacation, and forget about the portrait. The next morning, an envelope made of heavy cream paper with an embossed crest, that same octagon, lay on my doorstep. Inside was a silver signet ring, an exact replica of the ones in the painting, and an invitation to a private auction in Geneva with a handwritten note in Latin. Veritas vos non liberabit, sed vincier. The truth will not set you free, it will bind you. I flew to Geneva like a madman, spending my entire savings on a ticket without telling anyone, not even my wife. After that night, my apartment had been searched, professionally, almost imperceptibly. But I knew my things. I knew someone had been methodically looking for copies of the photos, my notes, anything that could link me to the discovery. The auction took place in a private hall of a Swiss bank on a street that didn't exist on any map. There were 30 people in masks, no names used, absolute silence. On the podium, under armored glass, lay a piece of parchment, a genealogical tree connecting 13 families: Orsini, Breakspear, Aldobrandini, Borghese, Conti, Colonna, Farnese, Medici, Gaetani, Pamphili, Este, and the House of Savoy. I recognized these names from history books, popes, Venetian doges, Florentine bankers. But here they were, linked by bloodlines, stretching across centuries, through revolutions and wars, through the changing of eras. Some branches led to modern surnames I'd seen in financial news, on central bank boards, and in exclusive clubs. The auction was abruptly halted. The parchment vanished. Security politely but firmly escorted everyone out through different exits. At the service elevator, an old man in an impeccable suit stopped me. He handed me a USB drive and spoke in Russian with a slight accent. "You are looking for answers in the wrong place. Ask yourself why your last name is on this list, in the section for second-tier administrators, Vaticanum Noctis, 1823. It's all there." Before I could respond, he vanished into the crowd, and the drive in my hand felt heavier than lead. What I found on that drive overturned everything I knew about history, the world, and reality. There were scanned documents from a classified section of the Vatican archives dated 1823, an agreement between Pope Pius VII and representatives of the 13 families regarding perpetuum imperium per invisibilitatem, eternal rule through invisibility. The clauses were laid out with bureaucratic precision: control of finances through the creation of central banks after the Congress of Vienna, manipulation of education through the funding of universities and the appointment of rectors, shaping public opinion through the acquisition of printing houses and publishers, and the use of revolutions and wars as corrective mechanisms to strengthen control. The appendices contained maps of influence, showing how every major event of the 19th and 20th centuries, from the revolutions of 1848 to the World Wars, from the creation of the Federal Reserve to the collapse of colonial empires, was part of a plan executed with mathematical accuracy. I found a mention of my own name, a side branch of the Conti family, third-level administrators. My great-grandmother was on the list. My grandfather, whom I never knew, worked at the State Bank of the USSR and disappeared in '53. I checked and double-checked every document, desperately hoping to find a forgery. But the seals were authentic, the handwriting matched archival samples, and even the paper passed dating tests. With every day spent in the libraries of Rome, London, and Paris, the puzzle pieces fell into place. I found that same octagon on the facade of the Bank of England, disguised as an ornament, in the foundations of the Bastille, in the architecture of the Federal Reserve Building, and in the layout of the IMF headquarters. Everywhere the threads of financial power converged. Now I am writing this in a hotel room in a city I will not name. For 3 weeks now, I have been changing locations every 2 days because I am being watched, professionally, persistently, and without disguise. Yesterday, someone left a photo of my daughter at school on a cafe table. No words, just the photo. And I understood the message. I have copies of the documents, hundreds of files on encrypted servers, names, dates, connections, proof of a system that has ruled the world for 200 years, maybe longer. A system where revolutions and wars are balancing tools, where democracy and dictatorship are two sides of the same control mechanism, where we all live in an illusion of choice created by those who wear the octagon rings and whose names never appear in the news. I could publish all of this, send it to hundreds of newsrooms, upload it to the internet, shout it in the streets. But who would believe me? I'd be labeled a conspiracy theorist, a paranoiac, a fraud. The documents would be declared forgeries. Experts would be found to debunk them. I would be discredited or simply removed, just like hundreds of others who got too close to the truth. And yet, I cannot remain silent. Not after what I've learned. Not after realizing my own family was part of this machine, that the blood in my veins ties me to a system I both hate and fear. I still have the ring. I carry it in my pocket as a reminder. Every time I squeeze it in my palm, I feel the cold metal and the weight of centuries. I think about the choice I have to make, stay alive and remain silent, or tell the truth and disappear like all those who tried to break the cycle. I still don't know the answer. I only know that the octagon around the eye watches me from everywhere, from architecture, from history, from my own reflection in the mirror, whispering, "You were always part of the system. The only question is whether you realize it." I flew to Geneva the day after I found the invitation. I had no choice. Curiosity and fear had mixed into a toxic cocktail that wouldn't let me sleep or think about anything else. The address didn't lead to an auction house or a hotel, but to a private hall in an old bank on Rue de la Coraterie. It was a 19th century building with a gray stone facade, so nondescript that I walked past it 3 times before finding a discreet bronze plaque with no inscription, only that same octagon. A security guard at the service entrance checked my invitation and scanned my retinas. When had they entered my data into the system? He escorted me to a buttonless elevator that descended slowly and silently, clearly going deeper than the basement. The doors opened into a hall resembling a theater box, 30 chairs arranged in an amphitheater, all facing a podium behind armored glass. The light was dimmed, and the air smelled of old leather and wax. People entered one by one, each through a separate door, all wearing identical Venetian masks, white, featureless, turning the gathered crowd into ghosts, mannequins, non-entities. I was handed a mask, too. I put it on, feeling like a participant in some absurd ritual, only to realize later that this wasn't theater. It was protocol. No one was meant to know who sat beside them. Here, faces, names, and personalities didn't exist, only presence and silence. On the podium, under a layer of armored glass, lay a parchment, massive, 1 meter by 1.5 meters, covered in the finest script of a genealogical tree. Its roots reached back to the 13th century, while its branches stretched to our time, intertwining, diverging, and converging again in marriages, alliances, and secret agreements. The auctioneer, a tall man in a black suit without a mask, with a face I somehow couldn't remember, as if it erased itself from my memory the moment I looked away, spoke in 3 languages: Italian, French, and English. He described the tree as a document of succession, a testament to continuity, a map of true power. I stared at the lines connecting the names: Orsini, Breakspear, Aldobrandini, Borghese, Conti, Colonna, Farnese, Medici, Gaetani, Pamphili, Este, House of Savoy. Every name was linked to the papal throne, Renaissance banking houses, or Venetian doges. I recognized these names from chronicles, textbooks, and museum plaques. But the longer I looked, the more clearly I saw the modern branches. Side branches led to surnames I had read in financial news, on central bank boards, and in the trustee lists of major corporations. There were Italian industrialists, Swiss bankers, French media moguls, British lords, and American political dynasties, all linked through marriages, godparents, and proxies in a multi-layered web stretching across 5 centuries. The starting bid was announced at 10 million Swiss francs, a figure that made my head spin. But the bidding never even started. Suddenly, the light cut out for a second. When it came back on, the parchment was gone. It had simply vanished from under the glass. The auctioneer spoke a single sentence. "The auction is canceled. Please exit through your individual doors. Thank you for your presence." There were no explanations, no panic. People rose silently and dispersed through different doors, as if on cue, as if it had been pre-planned, as if the entire auction wasn't a sale, but a demonstration, an initiation, a test. I walked toward the exit, my heart pounding and my head ringing with adrenaline and confusion. At the service elevator, I was stopped by an old man. He appeared so suddenly, I didn't even notice where he came from. Small, thin, in a perfectly tailored suit, with silver hair swept back and eyes that looked as if they could see through my every thought. He spoke in Russian, with a faint, unidentifiable accent. Italian, French, something else. "You are looking for answers in the wrong place, young man. You are looking at genealogies, symbols, and documents, but you aren't asking the main question. Why is your own name on this tree?" In the section for second-tier administrators, a side branch of the Conti through the maternal line. Your great-grandfather served the system, your grandfather disappeared when he tried to leave, and you are not here by accident. I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. How did he know my name, my ancestry, details I had only discovered a week ago? The old man handed me a matte black USB drive engraved with the words, Vaticanum Noctis, 1823. "Read," he said, "and you will understand that you weren't looking for a secret, but for yourself. All of us in this hall are bound not just by blood, but by an obligation older than our lives." He touched my shoulder. His hand was cold even through the fabric of my jacket, and added in a near whisper, "There are those born to rule, and those born to serve. The only question is whether you realize your place in the cycle. You have 48 hours. Then the drive will self-destruct." The elevator opened. I stepped in and turned around. The old man was gone. The corridor was empty, with only the distant sound of closing doors echoing in the silence. I stepped out onto the street in a state of near shock. Geneva looked absurdly normal. Tourists were taking photos by the fountain, trams ran on schedule, and watch shop windows glittered with dials ticking away the seconds of an ordinary world that suddenly felt like a movie set, a facade hiding something entirely different. The drive burned in my pocket. I reached my hotel, locked the door with every bolt, drew the curtains, and plugged it into a laptop with the internet turned off. The files opened without a password, as if they were waiting for me. There were hundreds of scanned documents dated 1823, an agreement between Pope Pius VII and representatives of the 13 families, meeting minutes, financial schemes, maps of influence, and correspondence in Latin, Italian, and French. And there, in Appendix 7, was the list of second- and third-tier administrators, my surname, the name of my great-grandfather, who held a position in the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Empire, and the name of my grandfather, who worked at the State Bank of the USSR and vanished in '53, without a trace, without a grave, simply erased from history. I read those documents until dawn, my hands shaking and my eyes watering from exhaustion and horror. It wasn't just the history of a secret society. It was an instruction manual, a step-by-step plan for control through finance, education, media, and religion. A plan that had been executed for 200 years with terrifying precision. And I realized the old man was right. I was looking for a secret, but I found myself. I found the explanation for my family's oddities, the disappearances, the silence, and the ease with which archive doors opened for me, as if someone had granted permission in advance. There was only one question: what to do with this knowledge? It was both a curse and a key, explaining everything while destroying everything I believed to be true about the world, about myself, and about the freedom of choice that perhaps never even existed. I flew to Rome 2 days after Geneva, consumed by the need to verify what I had read on the drive. The documents were too detailed, too specific to be fakes, but I still clung to the hope that this was some elaborate hoax, a game, a provocation. Through a paleographer acquaintance, I contacted the keeper of one of the restricted sections of the Vatican Secret Archives. It's officially called the Vatican Apostolic Archive now, but everyone still calls it secret. 3 days later, after background checks, letters of recommendation, and a sum of money that emptied my bank account, I was granted 4 hours of access to a hall where researchers are never allowed without special permission from the Holy See. I was led through a labyrinth of corridors, past reading rooms, down a spiral staircase, and into a windowless room where documents from the early 19th century were kept under controlled atmosphere. This was the period after the fall of Napoleon, after the Congress of Vienna, when Europe was being reshaped and someone was deciding what the new world order would be. And there, in a cardboard folder with the faded inscription, Concordiae Perpetuae, 1823, I found the originals, exact copies of the documents I saw on the drive. The treaty between Pope Pius VII and the representatives of the 13 families regarding Perpetuum Imperium per Invisibilitatem. The text was in Latin, the handwriting was calligraphic, the seals were authentic, and the paper was of the period. I was holding the agreement that described the mechanism of world control through finance, education, and information, a plan designed centuries in advance. The treaty was structured like a business contract, a preamble on the necessity of maintaining the stability of the Christian world in the face of revolutionary chaos, followed by 11 articles outlining specific mechanisms of influence. Article 1. The creation of central banks in key European states with the appointment of governors from trusted representatives of the 13 families, using the control of money emission as a tool to manage economies. Article 2. The funding of universities with the right to influence the appointment of professors, particularly to chairs of history, philosophy, and economics, to shape the correct intellectual elite. Article 3. The acquisition of printing houses, publishing firms, and later newspapers, controlling the narrative through ownership of the means of information distribution. Then came articles regarding the support of managed revolutions to topple uncontrollable monarchies, the provocation of local wars to weaken nation-states, and the creation of supranational structures, the precursors to the future League of Nations and the UN. In the appendices were maps of Europe with annotations, where the revolutions of 1848 were planned, how the Crimean War was intended to weaken Russia, and how the unification of Germany and Italy would create a new balance of power convenient for control. I photographed page after page with my phone, my hands shaking, sweat pouring down my back. It was impossible. It overturned all of history as I knew it, turning the chaos of the 19th and 20th centuries into a chess match where nations were the pieces and the players had been sitting at the table for 200 years. There was a map with dates. The 1830 Revolution in France, the 1848 uprisings, the Paris Commune, the First World War, each marked as a corrective mechanism, a planned crisis to strengthen financial control through war loans and post-war debt. I lost track of time. I was startled by the sound of footsteps in the corridor, fast, decisive, clearly not librarians. The keeper who had let me in stood at the door with a pale face. "You have to leave, now. Someone reported your presence. I don't know to whom, but people are coming who are not from the archive." I grabbed my phone, shoved the last documents I hadn't managed to photograph into my pocket, and the keeper led me not to the main exit, but down a narrow service staircase into the catacombs beneath the archive itself, ancient tunnels used since the Middle Ages for secret movement within the Vatican. My phone's flashlight caught damp walls, arches, and niches with decayed remains in the darkness. The smell of mold and stone was thick. I followed the keeper, hearing shouts and the slamming of doors behind me. They had entered the archive. They were looking for me, and I had a few minutes head start, no more. The keeper stopped at a fork. To the right is the exit to Piazza Santa Marta. To the left is the old crypt. There is another path there, but I don't know where it leads. No one has gone that way for decades. I chose left, instinctively, desperately, because the pursuit was coming from the right, and I needed time. The tunnel narrowed, becoming lower. I ducked, scraping my shoulder against the wall, stumbling over the uneven floor, and suddenly emerged into a chamber. A crypt, circular, about 10 meters in diameter, with a vaulted ceiling, entirely carved from stone. On the walls were bas-reliefs, barely discernible in the phone's light. 13 figures in robes standing in a circle. Above them, an octagon containing an all-seeing eye. And beneath the bas-relief, carved deep into the stone, was a Latin inscription: Tridecim familiae, unus oculus, cyclus infinitus. 13 families, one eye, an infinite cycle. I froze, reading words that seemed to have been waiting for me here for centuries, and at that moment I heard footsteps. They had found the tunnel. They were coming, and there was no time left at all. I bolted to the opposite wall, found a narrow passage barely visible behind a stone ledge, squeezed through, and ran blindly into the darkness, stumbling and gasping for breath. After a minute that felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light ahead, a sewer grate. I climbed out onto a street somewhere on the outskirts of the Vatican, filthy, in a torn shirt, with bloodied knees. Passers-by recoiled, but I didn't care. I was alive. The documents were on my phone. The copies were in the cloud, and I knew what I was never supposed to know. I hailed a taxi and gave the hotel address, but the driver took a wrong turn. I realized it too late, when we stopped not at my hotel, but at a deserted alley where a black Mercedes with tinted windows was waiting. 2 men in suits stepped out and opened the taxi door, not threateningly, almost politely. "Signor, you are expected. Please, step into the car. This is not a request." I could have run. I could have screamed. I could have tried to resist. But where do you run in a foreign city where every camera and every police officer is potentially part of the same system? I got into the Mercedes. The doors closed with a soft click, and the car pulled away, taking me toward the unknown, toward answers, or toward the end. I no longer knew the difference. In my pocket lay the phone with the photos of documents that could overturn the world or destroy me, and I thought about the inscription in the crypt, the infinite cycle I had just entered, perhaps forever, from which there is no exit, only a choice: to become part of the system or to disappear, trying to destroy it. Both paths led into the darkness, just by different roads. The car drove for about 40 minutes, weaving through the streets of Rome, until it stopped at the gates of a palazzo somewhere in the Trastevere district, a 16th century building with a dark stone facade. No signs, no number. Its windows closed with shutters, a place that doesn't exist on maps or in travel guides. I was led through a courtyard with a fountain, up a marble staircase, and into a hall with painted ceilings, and walls hung with portraits in gilded frames, men in robes, women in pearls, faces with cold eyes looking through the centuries. At a long ebony table sat one man, his back to the window, a silhouette against the light. When he turned around, I felt the ground fall away from beneath my feet. Sitting before me was my Uncle Mikhail, my father's younger brother, who I had been told my whole life died in a car accident in '92 when I was 3 years old. The same narrow nose, the same gray eyes, only aged, with wrinkles at the lids, silver hair swept back, an expensive suit, a Swiss watch, and cufflinks engraved with the octagon. He smiled, not happily, but rather sadly, the way one smiles when seeing a child who has broken a toy and is now trying to glue it back together. "Sit down, nephew. We need to talk, and you surely have many questions, though I think you already know most of the answers since you made it to the Vatican archives." His voice was calm, even warm, but I heard the steel in it, the absolute confidence of a man accustomed to giving orders and seeing them carried out. I sat down because my legs wouldn't hold me, because my brain refused to process reality. My uncle is alive, sitting in front of me, and judging by the surroundings and the way the guards treated him, he isn't just alive. He's part of the system, perhaps an important part. He poured 2 glasses of red wine, Barolo, judging by the label, a bottle older than me, and began to speak, slowly and methodically, like a professor giving a lecture. Our lineage, the Conti family through the maternal line, is one of the 13 side branches, what the documents call second-tier administrators. We are not the patricians, not the ones who sit at the pinnacle. We are the executors, the technical specialists, the people who ensure the mechanism works. Your great-grandfather managed financial flows in Tsarist Russia, redirecting funds to revolutionaries when it came time to change power. Your grandfather worked at the State Bank of the USSR, coordinating the post-war reconstruction of Europe so that debts would bind countries into a single system. But he made a mistake. He began to doubt, to think it was possible to get out, and he was removed in '53, quietly, without a trace. Your father, my brother, made the same mistake. He wanted to tell the truth, publish documents, warn people. The car he was driving with your mother didn't go off that bridge by accident. He paused, took a sip of wine, and looked at me with something resembling pity. You were 8 years old. They told you it was an accident. You grew up thinking you were free, that you were choosing your own life, but you were never free. Every step you took, every opportunity that opened for you, your job at the Hermitage, your access to the archives, even the meeting in Geneva. All of it was part of a test. We were watching to see where you would go, what you would choose, whether you were worthy to enter the system, or if you would repeat your father's fate. He opened a leather folder and took out a stack of documents, laying them on the table before me. Financial reports, bank transfers, schemes, dates, figures. "Look," he said, "here is the financing for the First World War. The British government received loans from the Rothschild and Warburg banks, and the German government received them from the same Warburgs through their Frankfurt branch. Both sides were in debt to the same network. The war lasted as long as it was profitable and ended when balance was achieved." The next document. The financing of the Bolshevik Revolution. Transfers from banks in New York and London through shell companies. Sums, names of intermediaries. The revolution in Russia was not spontaneous. It was a project managed from abroad to remove an unpredictable monarchy and create a controlled regime that could be used as a bogeyman for the West, a justification for military spending, a balancing tool. Further on, the financing of the Nazi Party in the 20s and 30s, American corporations, Swiss banks, investments in German industry. Hitler was raised as a counterweight to Stalin. Both dictatorships served one goal: to keep the world in tension, to justify the growth of state control, military-industrial complexes, and the debts that bind countries tighter than any chains. The Cold War followed the same pattern. The US and the USSR were funded from the same sources. The arms race enriched the same corporations, the space program, and the nuclear standoff. It was all theater, a managed conflict that lasted 40 years and ended when it was time for the next stage: globalization, unification under the guise of democratization. I listened, and with every word, something inside me broke. Not just my worldview, but the very foundation of my identity, my understanding of right and wrong, of freedom and captivity. The Cold War, terrorism, financial crises, pandemics, my uncle continued, flipping through the documents. These are all corrective tools. They are ways to keep humanity in a state of managed fear so that people will voluntarily surrender their freedom in exchange for security. So they will accept digital currencies, biometric control, and total surveillance as a necessity. We aren't villains, nephew. We are realists. Humanity is incapable of self-governance. History has proven that 1,000 times through chaos, bloodshed, genocide, wars, and the madness of the crowd. Someone must lead, direct, and correct. We have been doing this for 200 years. We prevented nuclear war in the 60s, managed the collapse of colonial empires so it happened relatively peacefully, and stabilized economies after crashes. You are only free because we allow it. You breathe because we decided to give you a chance." He fell silent, leaning back in his chair, studying me for a long time. Then he placed 2 items on the table. On the right, a diamond ring engraved with the octagon. On the left, a thick dossier with my photo on the cover and a red stamp that read, "Liquidation postponed." "Choose," he said quietly. "The ring means you accept your role, enter the system, and gain access to resources, power, and protection. You become who you were born to be. The dossier means you follow your father's path. You publish your findings, you become a target, and you live on the run until they find you. And they will find you, because there is no running from us. There is no way out of this cycle. What will it be? Order or chaos, life or death, reality or the illusion of freedom?" I stared at those 2 objects, and my mind was a void, an absolute ringing void, because for the first time in my life, I understood that there was no real choice. There was only the illusion of choice. Even the fact that I was sitting there being asked the question was the result of someone else's decision, someone else's will, a system that had given me just enough rope to either hang myself or learn to walk a tightrope over an abyss where both ends lead into the dark. I didn't take the ring, and I didn't take the dossier. I simply stood up and walked out of the hall, feeling my uncle's gaze on my back, heavy and disappointed. But he didn't stop me, and he didn't send guards. He just let me go, and that was more terrifying than any threat. It meant they were certain I would eventually return or break. It meant there was no escape. I went out to the street, hailed a taxi, went to the station, and bought a ticket for the first train out. It happened to be heading to Milan. Only in the train car, as Rome faded behind me, did I allow myself to breathe. I spent 3 days in cheap hotels in northern Italy, moving cities every 24 hours, trying to gather my thoughts and figure out what to do next. I had the documents on my phone and copies in the cloud. I had proof, but who could I show it to? Any newspaper or magazine could be part of the system. Any editor could be one of their people. Posting it online? The algorithms are controlled by the same corporations that, on the Vatican influence maps, led straight back to those 13 families. I realized I didn't just need proof. I needed proof so undeniable it couldn't be silenced. Something so specific the system couldn't ignore it. Then I remembered a name that flickered through every document from the 19th century to the present day. The Rothschilds. A banking dynasty, one of the 13 roots of the tree. If there were originals anywhere, primary sources, documents that couldn't be dismissed as forgeries, they would be in their archives, in the vaults of the oldest private bank in Europe. Through an acquaintance, a journalist at The Guardian, who investigated financial schemes and didn't yet know how deep the rabbit hole went, I got in touch with a technician who serviced the security system of a building on Lombard Street in the City of London. It was the former headquarters of N.M. Rothschild and Sons, which formerly no longer belonged to the family, but rumors said old vaults remained in the basement, never moved to the new offices. The technician agreed to help for a sum I raised by selling everything I could, including my parents' apartment, which I'd been renting out for years. Money was the last thing on my mind, because I had already passed the point of no return, that line where nothing remains but the goal. I flew to London on a fake passport that cost half of my remaining funds, and stayed at a hotel near King's Cross under an alias. For 3 days, I studied routes, cameras, and guard shifts. The technician let me in through a service entrance on a Sunday evening when the building was empty. He disabled the alarm for 20 minutes. That was all he could do. The risk was enormous, and the system logged every anomaly. We descended a metal staircase into the basement, passed through archival rooms filled with boxes of documents, and in the furthest corner, behind a steel door, the technician opened with a master key, was a room. A vault filled with old, cast-iron Victorian safes with mechanical locks, covered in dust. I opened the safes one by one. The technician had brought tools and crowbars, and we worked fast, knowing the clock was ticking. In the third one, I found what I was looking for. Bundles of letters dated 1815, correspondence in English and French addressed to Nathan Mayer Rothschild. The letters described troop movements before the Battle of Waterloo, the arrival of couriers with information 2 days before the official news, and instructions to agents to buy up British consuls at rock-bottom prices while the market panicked, expecting Wellington's defeat. It was the classic story everyone knew as a legend, but here were the originals, the signatures, the dates, the evidence of how one family used an information advantage to build a fortune on the blood of Europe. But that was just the beginning. In the following safes, I found memorandums from 1913, documents regarding the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. There were records of the meeting at Jekyll Island, where Senator Nelson Aldrich, Paul Warburg, Frank Vanderlip, and representatives of the Morgan and Rockefeller banks drafted the central bank legislation that handed control of American money to a private corporation disguised as a government agency. The notes listed surnames, the same 13, acting through proxies, through interlocking boards of directors, through a system that made it impossible to trace the real owners. But for those who knew the map of connections, it was obvious. Next was a dossier on the financing of the Bolshevik Revolution. Bank transfers from New York to Stockholm, and from there to Petrograd, through shell companies, sums, dates, and recipients. Lenin and Trotsky weren't getting their money from Russian workers. They were getting it from international bankers who saw the revolution as a way to remove the Tsarist regime, nationalize resources, and then control the new state through debt and loans. The next folder was the financing of the Nazi Party in the 20s and 30s, investments by American corporations into German industry, Ford, General Motors, Standard Oil, and loans to the German government that went toward rearmament. It all flowed through Swiss banks and shell firms, and the boards of these companies featured the same surnames, the same connections. Hitler wasn't an accident. He was a project groomed for a specific purpose: to create a counterweight to Stalin, to provoke a war that would reshape Europe, weaken nation-states, and create the conditions for a post-war global order. I saw photos of the Yalta Conference with margin notes, which advisors to Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin were linked to the banking houses, and who wrote the memorandums on the future UN, the Bretton Woods system, and the International Monetary Fund, tools of control through debt. I photographed feverishly, page after page, my hands trembling and sweat blurring my vision. I had about 5 minutes left before the alarm reset. In the final safe, I found a folder marked Bilderberg Conference 1954. It contained the minutes of the first meeting at the Hotel de Bilderberg in the Netherlands. The attendee list included politicians, bankers, heads of corporations, journalists, and scientists, 130 people from Europe and America discussing managed democracy, controlled integration of Europe, and the creation of supranational structures to prevent future wars. There were quotes from the speeches. The masses must believe they are choosing, but the choice must be predictable. Crises are the best tool for uniting nations. People surrender freedom for security, and the media must shape public opinion imperceptibly, creating an illusion of pluralism within a unified agenda. I recognized the faces of the participants from history books, people considered heroes of democracy and defenders of freedom. And here they were, sitting at the same table, planning how to limit that freedom, manage it, and make it predictable. This was worse than any document about wars. It was an admission that democracy, as we know it, is a performance. It was proof that elections only matter within a predefined corridor of possibilities, that real power is never elected. It is passed down through blood, through connections, and through membership in those 13 families and their satellites. The alarm went off, a siren wailed, and the technician screamed that we had to run. I was still uploading the final files to my phone and 3 cloud servers simultaneously. When I heard footsteps upstairs and the shouts of guards, I knew I was running out of time. The technician bolted for the emergency exit, and I followed. But at the stairs, 2 men in black were waiting. Not building security, but someone else. They appeared too quickly, as if they had known in advance. One grabbed the technician, the other stepped toward me. I lunged in the opposite direction, through the archival halls, toppling boxes and weaving between the shelves. I burst into a corridor, found a basement window, smashed the glass with my elbow, and scrambled out onto the street, an alley behind the building, lined with trash bins. I ran, hearing shouts behind me, but I didn't look back. I reached a tube station, went down, dissolved into the crowd, and took a train to Paddington. I switched lines, headed to the suburbs, and stepped into a 24-hour internet cafe. I checked. The files had uploaded, All 230 documents, the photos, the memorandums, the letters, evidence of 2 centuries of manipulation. I had everything I needed to shatter the facade. But when I left the cafe at dawn, a note lay on the hood of a parked car, held down by a stone. You are already dead. The only question is when. The handwriting was calligraphic, the paper expensive. I realized they knew where I was, had watched me all night, and could have taken me at any moment. They didn't because it was part of the game, psychological warfare. They wanted me to live in fear, to break from within, to make a mistake. And then they would take not just me, but the evidence. But the fear was gone, not because I had become brave, but because I realized that since I was already dead, I had nothing left to lose. The only thing that mattered now was telling the truth before they found a way to stop me, before the documents were deleted, while there was still one person who might believe me. The only question was who that person was, and where to find them in a world where every institution could be compromised, every journalist bought, and every platform controlled. I had no answer, only the files on my phone and the feeling that time was leaking away with every second, every breath, and every step through the empty streets of London, where cameras tracked my every move, and black cars followed slowly, never approaching, simply reminding me, we are here. We are always here, and there is no escape, because the entire world is their territory, their system, their infinite cycle. I received a message via an encrypted messenger on the 4th day after London. An anonymous contact. No name, just coordinates for a meeting in Malta, and a phrase. I have what you're looking for. A map of the living system. But time is short. They already know I've made contact. I didn't know who it was, whether it was a trap or a chance, but I had no choice. Documents from the past were important, but I needed to understand the present, how the system works now, and who specifically stands behind the decisions that reshape the world. I flew to Malta via Istanbul, again using a fake passport, and stayed at a hostel in Valletta. At midnight, I went to the address, the entrance to the catacombs of St. Paul, a tourist site by day, closed at night. The side door was ajar, as promised. I descended the stone steps into a labyrinth of underground galleries carved into the rock back in Roman times. The smell was of dampness and antiquity. My flashlight beam caught bone niches and crosses etched into the walls. In a distant chamber where 3 tunnels converged into a small hall, a man was waiting. In his 60s, thin, wearing glasses, and an expensive trench coat over a sweater. His hands shook, his face was gray and sickly. He introduced himself simply as Marco. He said he had worked for 20 years in structures linked to the system, a financial analyst at a fund whose name I would recognize, but he couldn't name it. He had signed a non-disclosure agreement that remained in effect even after death. But I'm dying, he added. Stage 4 cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. I don't care anymore what they do with the corpse. He pulled out a laptop and opened files. Diagrams so complex they initially looked like a chaos of lines and nodes. But as he began to explain, the picture settled into a nightmare of clarity. Look, he said, zooming in on a schematic. This is the modern control structure. It has evolved, become more complex, more invisible. But the principle is the same. Power through ownership of the system's key nodes. At the center of the diagram were 2 names, BlackRock and Vanguard, the world's largest investment funds, managing trillions of dollars in assets. From them, lines stretched to hundreds of corporations, pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Moderna, tech monopolies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, media conglomerates like Comcast, Disney, and News Corp, banks like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and HSBC. Defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, energy companies like ExxonMobil and Shell, and food empires like Nestle and Unilever. These funds own controlling stakes or major shares in all these corporations, Marco explained. But the question is, who owns the funds themselves? Officially, it's millions of small investors and pension funds. But the real control lies with the boards of directors, and that's where it gets interesting. He opened another file, a genealogical tree almost identical to the one I saw in Geneva and the Vatican. The same 13 surnames, but with modern branches. Through marriages, trust funds, shell companies, and nominee directors, the thread stretched from the old lineages to the people sitting on the boards of BlackRock and Vanguard, to the managing partners, to those who decide how to vote at shareholder meetings. It's not direct ownership, he said. It's a network of influence across several levels. But if you trace the connections, blood relations, godparents, joint charitable foundations, membership in private clubs, it all leads back to the same sources as 200 years ago. The next schematic showed secret societies, organizations I knew from conspiracy texts, but had always dismissed as exaggeration or fiction. The Order of Malta, knights with an 800-year history, formerly a Catholic charity, but the membership list included intelligence chiefs, defense ministers, and top-tier bankers. Opus Dei, a prelature within the Catholic Church controlling universities, media, and political parties through its members in Spain, Italy, and Latin America. Skull and Bones, the Yale University Student Society that has produced U.S. presidents, CIA directors, and heads of major corporations, a system for selecting and grooming an elite to be placed in key positions. The P2 Lodge in Italy, an 80s scandal linked to the Vatican Bank, the Mafia, and terrorist attacks, which didn't disappear after the public trial, but went deeper. Le Cercle, a private club of politicians and intelligence officers from Europe and the U.S. meeting twice a year without minutes or press, discussing strategic issues and coordinating policy between countries outside official channels. All these structures, Marco said, pointing at the screen, are subordinate to a single hierarchy. They are layers of the system, tools for recruitment, loyalty checks, and communication channels. People pass through them and then take posts in governments, corporations, and media. They already know the rules. They know whom to serve, what to say, and where to stop. He showed phone recordings, transcripts, and dates, discussions of the pandemic 3 months before the official announcement, framed not as a natural disaster, but as an opportunity for a system reset, for implementing digital passports, accelerating the shift to an online economy, and testing the level of public obedience through lockdowns and restrictions. Discussions of terrorist attacks as necessary sacrifices to justify increased control, expanding the powers of intelligence agencies, and normalizing surveillance. Economic crises as corrective mechanisms, market crashes that allow assets to be bought for pennies, and debts that bind states and corporations, making them dependent on those who control credit. Central bank digital currencies, Marco explained, opening memorandums bearing the logos of the Bank for International Settlements and the IMF, are the final step. It's money that can be turned off with the click of a button, money that tracks every transaction, every purchase, allowing them to control behavior through economic incentives and punishments. A social credit system, like in China, but global. Biometrics, facial recognition, total surveillance, under the guise of security and convenience. This isn't some future dystopia. It's a plan being implemented right now, step by step, crisis by crisis. Most people don't even notice because the media tells them it's normal, that it's progress, and that resistance is a sign of being backward or a conspiracy theorist. He paused, breathing heavily, and wiped sweat from his forehead. They aren't evil, you understand. Not like demons in movies. They sincerely believe they are doing the right thing, that humanity is too stupid, too irrational for self-governance. They believe the masses must be guided like a herd. Otherwise, there will be chaos and self-destruction. They see themselves as shepherds, the enlightened guardians of order, and us, the animals that need to be fed, sheared, and occasionally slaughtered for the common good. And the worst part is they are right about one thing. Most people don't actually want freedom. They want security, comfort, bread, and circuses. They are ready to trade their rights for a promise of protection, and the system knows this. It uses that fear, that infantility, as fuel. He pulled a portable hard drive from his pocket and handed it to me. Everything I've gathered over 20 years is on here. Influence maps, lists of names, financial flows, meeting recordings, documents I copied in secret, risking my life, even though I knew I'd never have the courage to publish them myself. But you're already on the other side. You're already a dead man, walking, just like me. At least one of us should get the word out before— He didn't finish. Suddenly he gasped, clutching his throat, his eyes widening as his face turned purple. He fell to his knees, wheezing, trying to say something, but only foam came from his throat. I rushed to him but realized this wasn't a heart attack or a seizure. This was poisoning, fast-acting, a toxin that kills in seconds. He reached out, squeezed my hand, shoved the drive into my palm and rasped, "Run! They're here!" and went limp. I grabbed the drive and the laptop, turned off my flashlight, and bolted into one of the tunnels at random. I heard footsteps behind me, voices, and flashlight beams sliding across the walls. They were in the catacombs, several men, combing the galleries methodically like professionals. I took turns, stumbled, and smashed my knee against a ledge, but I kept running until I reached another exit. A grate locked with a padlock. It was rusty. I hit it with a stone once, twice, 3 times until the lock snapped. I scrambled to the surface somewhere on the outskirts of Valletta, in a park that was empty and dark. I ran to a bus stop, caught the first bus that came by, and went to Sliema. I walked into a 24-hour internet cafe and plugged the drive into a computer. The files were encrypted, but Marco had left the password on a slip of paper taped to the drive. Veritas. I opened the archives and began copying them to the cloud, to 3 servers simultaneously. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and his last rattle echoed in my head, along with his words. They are here. They are always here. They knew about the meeting. They poisoned him before he left the house, or in the catacombs remotely, or through someone he trusted. This meant there were no safe places, no safe people, no way out of a game that didn't start today and won't end tomorrow. It's not a game. It's a system, an organism that protects itself from threats by killing off cells that try to break away. I was such a cell, just like Marco, just like my father, just like everyone who tried to tell the truth. The only thing I had left was the time remaining before they found a way to stop me. The question was no longer whether I would survive, but whether I would manage to publish what I knew, whether people would see it, believe it, and react before the system blocked the information, labeled it a fake, discredited it, or erased it as they had thousands of times before. Truth without the power to defend it is just noise dissolving into an ocean of lies. I sat in that internet cafe in Malta at dawn, uploading terabytes of data, knowing that somewhere in this city, maybe in the next building, someone was watching me through a camera, tracking my IP, waiting for the moment. I hadn't slept in 3 days, barely ate, lived on coffee and adrenaline, balancing on the edge between clarity and madness. I didn't know where that edge was. I didn't know if I was still a researcher or a paranoid man obsessed with a conspiracy theory eating me from within, turning me into a ghost. But the drive in my hands was real. Marco's death was real, and the documents were real. That meant I had to keep going, because stopping meant death. Silence meant death, and the only chance was to move forward, to publish, to scream into the void, hoping someone would hear before the system shut my mouth forever. I received the invitation a week after Malta, not an anonymous message or encrypted text, but an official letter on expensive embossed paper, delivered by courier to the hotel in Athens, where I was hiding under yet another alias. There was no return address on the envelope. Inside was a card with an engraved octagon and English text. We know where you are, what you have, and what you want. It is time to talk. 157, Penthouse, Manhattan, Friday, 8 p.m. A first-class ticket in your name is waiting at the airport. Come alone, no recording devices, no weapons. This is not a threat. It is an invitation to a dialogue. I sat there with the card in my hand, realizing the absurdity of the situation. They could have killed me at any moment, like Marco, or the technician in London who vanished the day after our break-in, like hundreds of others. Instead, they were inviting me to a meeting as if I were someone important, someone worth talking to. This was more frightening than any threat, because it meant they were so confident in their power that they could afford to be candid. They weren't afraid of my evidence, my knowledge, or my hatred. Either they wanted to offer something, or this was a final test before elimination. But I couldn't refuse. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too many contradictions in the documents I had gathered. I had to hear their version, look into the eyes of those at the top of the pyramid, and understand if they were even human or something else. Something so alien to normal human ethics that they couldn't be judged by normal standards. I flew to New York and passed through passport control without any issues. My real name, no questions asked, as if all databases had been wiped of any flags or warnings. A taxi took me to the skyscraper on West 57th Street. 157, one of the most expensive buildings in Manhattan. Glass and steel, 90 floors, $50 million apartments, a view of Central Park. In the lobby, a guard met me, checked my ID, put me through a metal detector, and asked me to leave my phone, my bag, and anything that could record. The elevator rose silently, the numbers flickering. 70th floor, 80th, 90th, penthouse. The doors opened into a hall the size of my former apartment. Hardwood floors and paintings I recognized. Monet, Renoir, originals just hanging on the walls like posters. I was led into a room with floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows. Manhattan lay below like a model. The lights of skyscrapers, the river, the bridges. Millions of people who had no idea that above them, literally over their heads, someone was making decisions about their fates. 5 people sat at a long ebony table, 3 men and 2 women, all in their 70s, but looking as if money and medicine had defeated aging. Fit, groomed, in impeccably tailored suits. Their faces were calm, almost benevolent, their gazes sharp and evaluating. No one introduced themselves. No names were used, just a gesture. Sit. I sat across from them, feeling like a student before an examination board, except the exam was for the right to live or to die with understanding. The man in the center spoke first. Silver hair, British accent, a deep voice used to commanding. You've done impressive work, gathered documents most people will never see, convinced yourself you've uncovered a great conspiracy, and now you want to save humanity from us, the evil puppet masters, right? We didn't invite you here to convince you to stay silent or to threaten you. That would be primitive and ineffective. We invited you to explain what you didn't understand while digging through archives, the context, the reasons, the philosophy behind actions that seem to you like manipulation and evil. The woman on the left, French accent, elegant with a pearl necklace, added, "You saw documents about wars, revolutions, and crises, and decided we provoked them for power or money. But that is a childish understanding. Money is a tool. Power is a responsibility. A burden most people are incapable of carrying because it requires seeing centuries ahead, sacrificing millions for the sake of billions, and making decisions that make you a monster in the eyes of contemporaries, but a savior in the eyes of history." The second man, American accent, younger than the others, about 60. After World War II, the world was on the brink of self-destruction. Nuclear weapons in the hands of irrational politicians, nationalism, fascism, communism, a chaos of ideologies, each ready to burn the planet for its own truth. Someone had to take control, create a system of checks and balances, and manage conflicts so they wouldn't escalate into an apocalypse. And we did it. The Cold War was theater, a managed standoff that kept both sides in fear, but didn't allow anyone to push the button because we controlled both Moscow and Washington through finance, through agents of influence, and through people who understood the necessity of the game. The second woman, with a strict and cold Italian accent, added, "You found documents about the financing of revolutions, and it shocked you that we gave money to the Bolsheviks, the Nazis, and both sides of every conflict. But you didn't stop to ask, why? It wasn't for profit. Wars are a net loss for the real economy. It was for control through chaos, to create conditions where old structures hindering global unification are destroyed, so that new ones can be built according to our plan. The League of Nations, the UN, the European Union, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO. None of these institutions were created by governments. They were created by us, through our people in those governments. The goal is a single, steady progression toward a world without national borders, without wars, and without poverty, managed centrally, rationally, and scientifically." The third man, with a German accent, and clearly the oldest, nearly 80, said, "You fear digital currencies, biometrics, and social credit scores. You see totalitarianism. But these are tools of efficiency, justice, and transparency. When every transaction is visible, corruption disappears. When every action is evaluated, crime disappears. When resources are distributed by algorithms, hunger and inequality disappear. We are building a world where human irrationality, greed, and violence are minimized through a system of incentives and constraints. And yes, that means the end of the freedom you romanticize. But that freedom is the freedom to kill, to rob, to lie, and to destroy the planet. Humanity has proven over thousands of years that it cannot handle such freedom, that the masses need guidance as children need parents. We fulfill this role not out of tyranny, but out of love, a harsh, rational love of a shepherd for his flock." The Briton spoke again. "We want to show you something." He nodded, and a screen activated on the wall behind them, displaying architectural plans. I recognized the buildings, the Pentagon, a perfect pentagon, but with internal structures forming an octagon. The UN headquarters in New York, its facade and layout were based on the same geometry. The European Parliament in Strasbourg, seen from above, showed octagonal symmetry. The octagon is the symbol of balance between the square of earthly order and the circle of celestial perfection. We embed it into the architecture of power centers as a reminder of our mission, a signal for those who understand. The next slide showed the American dollar, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, the Latin inscriptions Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new world order, and Annuit Coeptus, he favors our undertakings. Then the euro, the core symbol, a stylized Greek epsilon, but also two parallel lines binding it, a symbol of unity through finance. Corporate logos followed, CBS with its open eye, AOL with its pyramid and triangle, Vodafone's apostrophe like a comma in the speech of the invisible. Hundreds of examples I had previously dismissed as mere design were revealed as markers, signs of belonging, and ways of communicating through symbols for the initiated. "We don't hide," the Frenchwoman said. "We are in plain sight. Most people simply don't know how to see. They aren't trained to recognize the language of power. And that is by design. The secret isn't that we exist. The secret is that people won't believe it even when they are shown." The American continued, "Your parents, your father, he chose pride. He decided that the truth was more important than stability. And what was the result? He is dead. The documents he wanted to publish vanished, and nothing changed, except that a family lost a father, and the world did not become better for his sacrifice. We are offering you a choice, a real choice, not an illusion. Option 1. You join us. Not the core, you weren't born for that, but the second-tier managers. You get resources, protection, access to information you will never find in archives, and the opportunity to influence from within. You can steer the system toward more humanity, if you wish, working on projects that truly change the world, medicine, education, ecology, rather than just screaming into the void. Option 2. You publish everything you've gathered. The world learns the truth as you see it, but consider the consequences. Trust in institutions will collapse. Financial markets will crash because people will realize money is controlled, and governments will fall as people realize elections are an illusion. Riots, revolutions, and the chaos we have held back for 2 centuries will break out. Within 6 months, or a year at most, the world will be in a state that makes world wars look like child's play. Modern humanity is so dependent on the system, electricity, internet, logistics, medicine, food, that without centralized management, everything collapses in weeks. Millions, no billions, would die of hunger, disease, and violence. The German added, "We aren't exaggerating. We have models and simulations of what happens upon disclosure. We can show you. But you already understand. Truth without the readiness to accept it is poison. The system isn't held together by lies. It is held together by necessary ignorance, by a consensus that some things are better left unknown so that life can continue to function." The Briton stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "You have 72 hours to decide. We won't pressure you or threaten you. We are simply explaining reality. If you choose to publish, we won't stop you by force. We will let you, but we will manage the fallout. We will discredit it, label it a fake, and isolate you. In the end, most won't believe it, or won't want to believe it, because the truth is too terrifying and destructive to their comfortable world. You will become just another conspiracy theorist, a madman shown on TV as a warning to others. If you choose to join, welcome to reality, where decisions are made not by heart, but by calculation, where sacrifices are inevitable but justified, where morality isn't black and white, but a gray, pragmatic gradient. You will learn to live with this, as we do." He turned and looked at me for a long time. "Your father was an idealist. Idealists are wonderful in books, but useless in real power because they aren't willing to get their hands dirty. Power always means dirty hands, always choosing the lesser evil, always a compromise between what should be and what is possible. What will you choose? The chaos of honesty or the order of lies? And before you answer, ask yourself, are you ready to be responsible for the billions of deaths that will follow if the system collapses? We are ready. We have carried this burden for 200 years. Are you?" They stood up without waiting for an answer. The Italian woman left a card on the table. "A phone number. Call when you decide, or don't call, and we will understand your choice by your actions." They exited through another door, leaving me alone in that hall overlooking Manhattan at night. I sat there, looking at the city lights, the ant-like flow of cars, and the life flowing below, unaware of the conversations happening above. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what was right: to destroy the system and bury billions under the rubble, or to preserve it and become an accomplice to manipulation and the betrayal of the ideals my father died for. It wasn't a choice between good and evil. It was a choice between different kinds of evil, between active destruction and passive complicity. I realized they won, not because they were stronger, but because they were right about one thing. The world is indeed too complex for simple answers, too fragile for radical truths. Perhaps their lie is a form of mercy, a way to preserve the illusion that allows people to sleep soundly, never knowing they are slaves. Happy slaves who traded their freedom for security and don't even remember they had a choice. I didn't answer them after 72 hours. Instead, I bought a ticket to St. Petersburg. It was the last city where I hadn't looked for answers. The site of the last archive I'd heard about in whispers from Marco before he died. A secret vault beneath the Peter and Paul fortress. It was a place where the KGB sent documents on Western influence operations, records showing that Soviet intelligence knew everything about the black nobility, but stayed silent because they were part of the same game. I made contact through the dark web with a man calling himself a former FSB archivist, someone willing to lead me to places officially non-existent on department maps for money I no longer had. We met at night by the Trinity Bridge. He led me not through the main gates of the fortress, but through an old tunnel bricked up in the 19th century, with a crawl space known only to insiders. We descended a metal ladder into the dark, the air thick with the smell of dampness and rust, the walls slick with condensation. At the end of the tunnel sat a steel door embossed with the Soviet coat of arms. The lock was electronic, but the archivist knew the code. He said it hadn't been changed since the 90s, because the place was forgotten after the collapse, left as it was, too secret to acknowledge, too dangerous to destroy. Behind the door was a room the size of a hangar, shelves reaching the ceiling, boxes of documents covered in dust. Under flickering emergency lights, I began to search methodically, shelf by shelf, until I found a section marked Top Secret Operation Mirror, the KGB's dossier on Western influence structures, compiled since the 1950s. I opened the folders one by one, and with every page, the world I was shown in New York crumbled and rebuilt itself into an even darker image. Soviet intelligence knew everything, absolutely everything, about the black nobility, the 13 families, and the control through finance, media, and education. But instead of fighting it, they integrated into the system. They became part of it. The documents showed that the 1917 revolution wasn't just funded by Western banks. It was a joint operation where the German General Staff, British intelligence, and American financiers acted in concert to remove the Russian monarchy and create a regime managed through ideology and fear. Lenin, Trotsky, even Stalin, they all received money, instructions, and support from the same sources that funded their opponents. The goal wasn't the victory of communism or capitalism, but the creation of two poles between which the world could be managed through controlled conflict. Regarding the Cold War, I found a 1962 memorandum from the Central Committee of the CPSU stating explicitly, "The confrontation with the West is of a managed nature. Real nuclear war is excluded as both sides coordinate actions through back channels. The goal is the maintenance of military-industrial complexes, justification of internal repression through an external threat, and the acceleration of technological progress through an arms race. There were photos from meetings in the 70s, Brezhnev, Andropov, and Politburo members, at the same table as representatives from the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Morgan Stanley. They met in Switzerland in private residences to discuss quotas for oil, grain, and technology, agreeing on the boundaries of conflicts, who would influence where, and who supported whom. It was a theater where the actors knew their roles, and the audience, the nations, believed in the reality of the performance. Then I found KGB analytical reports, dated 89, 90, and 91. They predicted the collapse of the USSR 2 years before it happened, not as a catastrophe, but as a managed transformation necessary for the transition to the next stage of global integration. The report stated, "The Soviet system has fulfilled its task. It created a counterweight to the West, justified militarization, accelerated scientific progress, and prepared the ground for a unified world system. The continued existence of the USSR is no longer expedient, as it hinders economic globalization. A controlled dismantling is recommended through economic crisis, nationalist movements, and a change of elites. Key personnel from the KGB and the party apparatus will be integrated into new power structures, the oligarchy, and the Russian Federation's special services, ensuring continuity of control." Appended was a list, names of people who in the 90s became oligarchs, politicians, and heads of corporations. Almost all were linked to either the KGB, the party elite, or Western banks through shell companies created before the collapse. Perestroika was not spontaneous. It was a project. Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and all the key figures acted according to a script, written neither in Moscow nor Washington, but somewhere higher, in the very penthouses I was invited to a week ago. I found a 1991 memorandum signed by someone in the leadership of the KGB's first main directorate. The final goal, the creation of a post-national world order by 2030. Tools, digital currency for transaction control, biometric systems for movement control, artificial intelligence for information control and behavioral forecasting, and social credit for management through incentives. Nation-states remain as administrative units, but real power shifts to supranational structures, corporations, funds, and international organizations managed by a single center. Resistance will be minimal as the transition is gradual, occurring through crises, economic, epidemiological, climatic, and terrorist, each of which justifies a new level of control. But among these documents of horror, I found something else, a folder marked Resistance List, thick, about 300 pages long, containing names of people worldwide who at various times tried to expose the system or tell the truth, and what happened to them. Journalists killed in car accidents, scientists who committed suicide under suspicious circumstances, politicians who died of sudden illnesses, activists discredited by scandals, economists declared insane, hundreds of names, hundreds of fates, each with a note: neutralized, discredited, eliminated. I recognized some names, people I had read about, whom I considered heroes, dissidents, fighters for truth, and all of them had been destroyed, methodically and professionally, so that their deaths looked like accidents or the consequences of their own actions. And at the end of the list, at the very bottom, a handwritten addition dated last year. My name, my father's name, Marco, the technician from London, and dozens of other surnames with the note, "In progress." I photographed everything, every page, uploaded it to the cloud and to backup servers I had set up, so the data would automatically publish if I didn't enter a code within 48 hours. A dead man's switch that would fire even if I were killed. The archivist hurried me, saying the system logs the duration of stay, but I couldn't tear myself away, reading the last document, a forecast for the year 2030. The world is united under a global government masking itself as international institutions. National identity is erased through migration and multiculturalism. Religion is replaced by secular humanism and a cult of science. The economy is fully digital. Every transaction is tracked and can be blocked. Movement is controlled through biometrics and social credit. Dissent is suppressed not physically, but through social isolation and economic sanctions. Humanity is stable, managed, predictable. Chaos eliminated. Freedom is an archaism remembered only by historians. I left the archive at dawn, the Peter and Paul Fortress, the Neva. The city was waking up. People were going to work, to schools, living their ordinary lives. And I looked at them, knowing what they didn't know, carrying a burden that was tearing me apart inside because I had less than 2 days to decide. Press the button and unleash a truth on the world that might destroy it, or stay silent and become an accomplice to a system that turns people into a managed herd. Both choices were a betrayal, either a betrayal of humanity through silence or a betrayal of specific people who would die in the chaos if the system collapsed, and I didn't know which was worse. I only knew that time was up, the clock was ticking, and every passing hour brought me closer to the moment when the choice would be made for me by chance, death, or someone else's will. The only thing clear was that there was no turning back. I had passed the point beyond which only forward movement remains, into an unknown that could be the end of everything or the beginning of something new. If I had the courage to pull the trigger, knowing the bullet could kill not only the enemy, but those standing behind them, the innocents who just wanted to live without knowing the truth. Because the truth, as it turned out, is not liberation. It is a curse, a weight impossible to carry alone. I walked along the embankment, clutching the phone with the cancellation code in my pocket, and I didn't know if I would enter it when the time came or allow the dead man's switch to fire, unleashing an avalanche of documents that would bury the lies along with the illusion of safety. What would remain afterward? Ruins or freedom? Chaos or awakening? I didn't know. I only felt that my decision, whatever it might be, would change not the world. The world is too large and inert, but it would change me, finally and irrevocably, turning me into either a traitor to my ideals or a murderer of millions who would die in the fire of truth. There was no third option, because the system I uncovered leaves no room for compromise or half measures. It demands an absolute choice. You are with it or against it, and the price of any choice is a piece of your soul you must give in exchange for the right to keep breathing. If, of course, they allow me to breathe after I make that choice. I received the final message from them 12 hours before the deadline. Coordinates for a meeting in Rome at St. Peter's Basilica, not in the main hall, but in a private chapel accessible only to the highest Vatican officials, with the text, the final conversation. Come if you want to see what happens when you press the button. We will show you the future you are choosing. I flew on a night flight, passed through Vatican security with a pass waiting for me at the entrance. I was led through halls, past tourists and pilgrims, down a narrow staircase into the crypt, then even lower into rooms unknown to tour guides. Ancient chapels built on the foundations of pagan temples, walls painted with Renaissance frescoes, an altar of black marble, candles, the smell of incense. They were sitting there, the same 5 as in New York, in the same impeccable suits, faces calm, but I saw the tension in their posture. They knew I was close to a decision, that I had gathered everything I could, that I had evidence capable of destroying the facade of their power. The Briton nodded to me, pointed to a chair opposite, and when I sat down, the wall behind them lit up. Dozens of screens, live broadcasts from different parts of the world. I saw stock exchanges, graphs of plummeting indices, red numbers, panicked traders. City streets, crowds, riots, police with batons, burning cars, borders, military columns, tanks, soldiers in full combat readiness, hospitals, overcrowded wards, people on stretchers in corridors. This is happening right now, the Americans said, because we allowed it. We loosened control for 48 hours to show you how quickly order collapses when the invisible hand stops holding the world. The Frenchwoman stood up, walked to the screens, and pointed to each one. Frankfurt. The exchange is collapsing because we ordered our traders to sell. Panic is contagious. In an hour, London and New York will crash. Paris, migrants and the far right are clashing in the streets because we fueled the conflict through our people in the media, signaling both sides that it was time to act. The Korean border, troops have been placed on high alert because we transmitted contradictory messages through diplomatic channels, creating the appearance of a threat that doesn't actually exist. All of this is theater, managed chaos, so that you understand, we are not bluffing. We truly hold the world in our hands, and if you publish those documents, if the truth comes out, this managed chaos will become real and uncontrollable. People will lose faith in institutions, in money, in governments, and in the very idea of order. The German added, his voice like ice. A week after publication, mass bank runs will begin. The banks won't survive. The financial system will collapse, trade will halt, and logistics will break. Stores will empty. In 2 weeks, famine will begin in the cities. In a month, epidemics, because the medical system depends on constant supplies. In 3 months, resource wars. Governments will fall, armed groups will seize power, and the world will return to the Middle Ages, but with nuclear weapons in the hands of barbarians. You will be to blame for the deaths of billions, not us, but you, because we warned you, gave you a chance, and you chose pride, just like your father. And like him, you will condemn innocents to death in the name of an abstract truth that saves no one, but only kills. The Italian woman spoke. You still have time. Enter the cancellation code, renounce the publication, and we will stop this. We will restore stability. The world will forget these 48 hours like a market correction, a local riot, a diplomatic misunderstanding. Life will go on, and no one will die. The choice is yours. Apocalypse or status quo. I stared at the screens, at the burning streets, at the plunging graphs, at the faces of people distorted by fear, and everything inside me tightened with horror and doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe the truth really would kill more than it would save. Maybe my struggle was just ego, a desire to be a hero without thinking of the consequences. But then I noticed a detail. On one of the screens showing the riots in Paris, a billboard flickered in the corner of the frame with a concert poster dated for next month, an event that hadn't happened yet. I looked closer at the other screens. The stock market graphs weren't synchronized with real time. There was a lag or an acceleration. The sunlight on the streets in Korea didn't match the current time of day. The hospital looked like a news clip from a year ago. I had seen that report before. These weren't live broadcasts. It was an edit. A mix of real archival footage, staged scenes, and perhaps a few real events. But for the most part, it was a manipulation, an attempt to terrify me with an illusion of omnipotence they don't fully possess. I realized their power rests not only on real control, but on psychology, on the belief in their invincibility, on the fear of those who know the truth, the fear that resistance is futile, that they see everything, control everything, and can do anything. But if part of this demonstration was a fake, it meant they weren't so all-powerful. It meant they were afraid that the publication really could change something. Otherwise, why all this theater? Why the meetings, the conversations, the threats? The truly omnipotent don't need to persuade. They simply act. I pulled out my phone. They tensed. The Briton took a step forward. Don't do it. You don't understand the scale of the catastrophe. But I had already opened the app, not the cancellation code, but another. I launched a live stream to 20 platforms simultaneously. Secured servers, anonymous channels, blockchain storage where data cannot be deleted. I began uploading the documents, the Vatican archives, the Rothschild correspondence, the Bilderberg memorandums, the KGB dossiers, the maps of influence, the photos, the audio recordings, everything I had gathered over the months. Terabytes of information spreading like a virus across the network, copying itself onto millions of devices, beyond the reach of centralized control. I looked into their eyes, the eyes of people who for 200 years had considered themselves masters of reality, and I saw something that wasn't in the documents. I saw fear. Not the fear of death, but the fear of losing control. The fear of a world where they are no longer the shepherds and the people are no longer the flock. The truth won't kill the world, I said, my voice sounding strange in the silence of the ancient chapel. It will only kill your world. And if chaos follows, it will be the chaos of birth, not death. The chaos of a humanity that has finally woken up and realized it's being led to the slaughterhouse. Maybe we won't handle this freedom. Maybe we'll destroy ourselves. But it will be our choice, our mistake, our life, not your chess game played with our souls. They didn't move, didn't try to grab the phone, didn't call the guards. They just stood there, 5 silhouettes against the backdrop of fake screens, as the data, the real, raw, terrifying data, poured out into the global network, reaching millions of people who were just beginning to wake up, to read, to understand. The octagon was broken, the cycle was interrupted, and even if they kill me in a minute, it won't change anything. The information is already there. It's alive. It's multiplying. And there's no way to turn it off, no way to delete it from the collective memory of a species that just found out it has been living in a cage for 2 centuries. I walked out of the cathedral into the Roman night. The air was warm and smelled of pine and ancient stone. Tourists were still laughing at the cafes. Taxis were still driving. The world looked the same as an hour ago. But I knew that everything had already changed, that the shockwave was just beginning to travel, that tomorrow the morning news wouldn't be able to ignore the avalanche, that the system would start to falter, lashing out in its death throes. But the secret was out. I reached the Tiber, stopped on the bridge, and threw the phone into the dark water. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need the codes, the passwords, the aliases. I was just a man who had told the truth, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. Not the freedom they offered, the freedom of a well-fed slave, but the real, terrifying, cold freedom of a man who knows he might not see the sunrise, but who also knows that the sun will rise on a different world. I walked through the streets of Rome, toward the morning, toward the unknown, and I wasn't afraid of the black cars, the cameras, or the people in suits. They were just part of a disappearing nightmare. And in front of me was a reality that we would have to build together, from scratch, on the ruins of the great lie. The infinite cycle had ended, and what came next was no longer a plan or a scenario. It was a story that we, all of us, would write ourselves for the first time in 200 years. 6 months have passed since that night in Rome, when I pressed the button and released the truth into the world. I survived, which in itself is surprising. They didn't kill me. They simply let me go after 2 days of interrogation in a basement somewhere beneath the city. They questioned me about my sources, about copies, about accomplices. But I stayed silent because there was nothing left to say. Everything was already online, millions of copies made. Killing me had become pointless, even counterproductive, because my death would have made me a martyr and confirmed the authenticity of the documents. Instead, they chose a different strategy: discredit, dilution, and information noise. I followed the reaction from a rented room in a god-forsaken village on the border of Serbia and Bosnia, where the internet works via satellite dish and the nearest neighbor is a kilometer away. The documents did indeed spread. Millions of downloads, thousands of articles, hundreds of investigations. But the world didn't change. It didn't flip upside down. It didn't rise up in righteous anger. Major media outlets, CNN, the BBC, the New York Times, called it the largest conspiracy hoax of the 21st century. They brought on historical experts who pointed out obvious inconsistencies, anachronisms, and forged seals, even though I knew the documents were genuine. I knew these experts were either mistaken, lying, or part of the system themselves. Social networks blocked the primary hashtags, and algorithms suppressed posts mentioning the black nobility. A few independent journalists began their own investigations. One died in a car crash a month later. Another committed suicide, leaving a note about depression. And a third was arrested for pedophilia after evidence was found on his computer, though everyone who knew him said it was absurd. The governments of several countries, Italy, France, even the US, promised to conduct inquiries and created commissions that promptly got bogged down in bureaucracy, document requests, and legal hurdles. Within 3 months, people stopped talking about them because new crises appeared, new scandals, and new reasons for outrage. The attention of the masses shifted, as it always does, to something simpler, more emotional, and more suitable for consumption. I live under an alias, working remotely as a translator, writing texts for pennies, and rarely leaving the house except for groceries in the neighboring village, where no one knows who I am or cares to ask. At night, I read forums where people discuss my documents. Some believe, calling me a hero. Others think I'm a fraud or a madman. Most simply aren't interested because it's too complex, too massive, and too terrifying to accept as reality. The truth turned out not to be a weapon of liberation, but just another conspiracy theory among thousands of others, drowning in an ocean of information garbage where it's impossible to distinguish fact from fiction. The system learned to protect itself not through censorship, but through excess. When there is too much truth, when anyone can publish anything, and when experts can be bought or discredited, the truth loses its power. It becomes an opinion, a version, one among many, and people choose the version that is more convenient, the one that doesn't destroy their worldview, their comfort, or their illusion of control over their own lives. I keep the ring with the octagon that I found on my doorstep in St. Petersburg months ago. I carry it in my pocket as a reminder that all of this was real, that I didn't lose my mind, and that the system exists even if the world decided not to believe. Sometimes I take it out, look at the symbol, and think, maybe they were right in New York. Maybe humanity really isn't ready for the truth. Maybe the lie is a form of mercy, a way to maintain the stability I tried to destroy. I failed not because the system is too strong, but because people themselves choose not to know, not to see, and not to fight. Fighting requires sacrifice, and few are willing to sacrifice comfort, security, and a familiar life for an abstract freedom. I don't blame them. I understand. I paid the price myself, and I know how much it costs. I traded everything that came before, everyone I loved, and the entire life I could have had for a truth the world rejected. Whether that was fair or right, I no longer know. I only know there was no choice. Silence would have killed me from the inside faster than any bullet. Today I recorded a final video, not for publication, just for myself, or for whoever might find it one day. A will or a confession, I'm not sure what to call it. I set the camera on the table, hit record, and spoke into the lens, knowing these words might never be heard. But I needed to say them to close the cycle, to put a period on it. I told the truth, I said to the camera, my voice tired, my face having aged more in 6 months than in the previous 10 years. I published the documents, the evidence, the names, the schemes, everything I could find, and the world responded, with indifference, skepticism, and oblivion. The system adapted, as it always does. It discredited, diluted, and distracted. Life went on as if nothing happened. No, something did happen. A crack appeared, small and invisible to most. But it's there, in the minds of those thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people who read the documents and believed, who began to doubt, to ask questions, to look at the world differently. The system exists not because it is omnipotent, but because we allow it to exist every day with every choice. Which bank to trust with our money, which media to believe, which politician to vote for, which corporation to support with our purchases. Each of these decisions is a brick in the wall of their power, and each one can be changed, refused, or resisted, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's expensive, even if it seems pointless. The system relies on our consent, our fear, and our inertia. When enough people stop consenting, the system cannot continue, at least not in its current form. I gave my life for this truth. I didn't die physically, but I lost everything that made life worth living. Family, career, future. I became a ghost living in exile. I don't ask you to follow my path. I don't call for sacrifices. I simply say, do what you can with the resources you have. Doubt, verify. Do not take on faith what the authorities, the media, or the experts tell you. Think for yourselves. That is enough. That is already resistance, because the system wants you not to think, to trust, and to obey. Every act of independent thought is a blow to its foundation. I fell silent and stared into the camera for another minute, then stood up and walked to the window. Outside, on the only road leading to the house, stood a black car. Not local, expensive, with tinted windows. The engine was running, the exhaust forming a small white cloud in the cold air. They found me, of course. I knew they would find me sooner or later. Perhaps they had been watching me all this time, just waiting, observing what I would do. And now they had come. Why? I didn't know. To kill me, to take me, to offer me another choice? It didn't matter to me. I had said what I wanted. I had done what I could. And what happened next was no longer my story. Mine ended the moment I pressed that button in Rome. Everything after was an epilogue, a survival, borrowed time. I smiled. I don't know why. Maybe because it was absurd. Maybe because I was tired of being afraid. Or maybe because I finally understood what they had said in New York. The cycle is indeed infinite. You don't defeat the system with one blow, one publication, or one sacrifice. This is a struggle of generations, of centuries, where everyone takes a step, hoping those who follow will go further. My step was taken. Small, perhaps meaningless, but taken. Someone, someday, will take the next one, and another, and eventually, maybe in decades, maybe in centuries, those steps will form a path leading to freedom. Real freedom, not an illusion. I won't see it. None of us will. but that doesn't mean the journey isn't worth taking. I turned off the camera, downloaded the file to a flash drive, and hid it inside a book on the shelf where someone might find it if they look, or perhaps it will never be found. And that is also fine. What mattered was not the result, but the attempt, the act of resistance itself that makes a person human rather than a compliant unit in a control system. I put on my jacket and stepped onto the porch. The car was still there. The door opened and a man stepped out. I didn't recognize his face, but I recognized the type. A guard, an enforcer, a man who follows orders without asking questions. He walked toward me slowly, hands in his pockets, without haste or threat, almost politely. I stood and waited, not running, not resisting, because there was nowhere to run. Resistance was futile, and because I was ready. I had been ready from the moment I started looking for the truth. I knew it was a one-way street, and I had walked it to the end, or to the point where my part of the path ends and someone else's begins. In this passing of the torch, in this infinite cycle of resistance and suppression, of truth and lies, of freedom and control, I was one link. Not the first, not the last, just a link that didn't break, didn't surrender, didn't betray. That is enough for the chain to continue, so that those who follow will know. It is possible. It is possible to resist, possible to tell the truth, possible to disagree even if the price is high, even if victory doesn't come in your lifetime, even if the world doesn't change because of your actions. Changes don't happen from a single action. They are the result of many actions, many sacrifices, many attempts. My attempt is now part of that multitude, a drop in the ocean that doesn't think it will change the current, but continues to fall, because that is its nature, its essence, its only meaning. The man stopped a few steps away and said something, but I wasn't listening. I looked past him, at the road, at the hills, at the sky where the sun was setting, painting the clouds red, the color of blood or fire, an end or a beginning, depending on how you look at it. I chose to see a beginning, because an end is too simple, too final, and a beginning is hope, even if it's irrational, even if all the facts are against it, even if the system is invincible and eternal. Eternity is also an illusion. Everything crumbles sooner or later, even mountains, even empires, even control systems built 200 years ago that seemed unshakable. They crumble when the time comes, when enough cracks accumulate, when enough people stop believing. My publication, my documents, my sacrifice, these are one of those cracks, small but real. They will remain even when I am gone, even when the world forgets my name. They will remain in files, in copies, in the memory of the few who read and understood, and who will pass it on, maybe to their children, maybe through an article, maybe through a conversation in a bar. Doesn't matter how. What matters is that the transmission occurs, the relay continues. That was all I could hope for, all that made this path worth taking. Now, when the man extended his hand, gesturing me toward the car, I nodded and walked forward without looking back at the house that was never a home, only a refuge, temporary, as everything in this life is temporary. I got into the car, the door closed, and the car moved, carrying me into the unknown. Perhaps the final one, perhaps not. I didn't know, and didn't try to guess. I just looked out the window at the passing landscape, at the trees, the fields, the scattered houses, at the world I tried to change and couldn't. But the attempt happened, and it mattered, at least to me. That was enough. It has to be enough, because a person can do no more than try. Take the risk. Tell the truth. What happens next is not in his power. It is in the hands of others. Thousands, millions of others, who will decide what to believe, what to fight for, what to sacrifice. My choice is made. My story is told. My part of the path is walked. If there is something after, if this ride is not the end, but just another chapter, I will meet it the same way I met everything else, without illusions, without fear, with the understanding that the truth doesn't make you free. The truth makes you responsible. That responsibility, heavy, unbearable at times, is the only thing that distinguishes a human from an animal, a slave from a free man, the living from the dead. I lived, truly lived, only in these last months when I knew the truth and carried it. It was a real life, short, dangerous, but real. No compromises, no lying to myself, no illusions. In these months, I lived more than in all the previous years combined. Therefore, I have no regrets, even now, even as the car carries me into the darkness. I have no regrets, because to regret is to wish things were different, and I don't wish that. I chose this path consciously and freely. It is my path, my truth, my life. No one, not even them, not the system, not all their power, can take this choice from me, this freedom of the final decision that I made and carried out. The screen darkens, just as it darkened outside the car window, and in the darkness, a symbol appears, the octagon around the eye. Familiar, hateful, a reminder that the cycle continues, that the system is not defeated, that they are still here, still in power, still in control. But beneath the symbol are words they do not control, words written by me or someone after me. The cycle continues, but so does the resistance. As long as there is even one person who knows the truth and does not stay silent, the system hasn't won completely. It hasn't sealed every crack. It hasn't extinguished every spark. My spark, weak as it is, may go out, but somewhere another will ignite, and another, and another. One day, eventually, these sparks will merge into a fire that will burn away the illusions, the lies, and the fear upon which their power rests. Then, and only then, will humanity be free, not in their managed world of order and control, but in the chaos of reality, where everyone is responsible for their own choice. It is terrifying, and it is difficult, and many will not want such freedom. They will prefer the safety of slavery. But those who do want it will know. It is possible, it is achievable, because someone before them walked this path, paid the price, and left tracks. These tracks, like stars in the night, help us not to lose our way, not to lose direction, not to give up. My track is now among them, small, dim, but visible to those who seek. This is all I could give, all that made it worth living, dying, and resisting. The cycle continues, yes, but not just their cycle of power. Our cycle of resistance continues too. The question isn't who will win. The question is, whose side are you on when your hour comes to choose? To stay silent or to speak, to obey or to resist, to live in an illusion or to die for the truth. My choice is made. The screen goes completely dark. The octagon vanishes. Only the darkness remains, and the echo of the final words dissolving into silence, but not disappearing entirely. Because words once spoken live forever. They are passed on, transformed, and they inspire. These words, my confession, my testament, will remain somewhere, somehow, in someone, serving as a reminder. The truth is worth fighting for, even if the struggle seems pointless, even if the system is invincible, even if you are alone against the world. Because you are not alone, never alone. There are others. There were those before you, and there will be those after. Together, through time and space, through deaths and sacrifices, we continue to walk, step by step, toward the freedom they took from us, but which we, sooner or later, will take back. This is the promise I give as I die or disappear. The promise that the fight is not over, that the next person will come, and another, until the cycle of their power breaks under the weight of our resistance, and humanity remembers what it's like to be free.